Okay, for some reason I don't seem to be able to go onto Facebook, so I'm just going to record it on the computer. I'm sorry, I apologise for that.
Can you then put that up on the...
I will afterwards, but not at the same time.
Right. Right, we're just about there. When do you finish?
Hey, early March.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You got months and months of abuse in front of you still.
Yeah, living the dream every day. Yeah. 17 years when I get there. So
wow.
Yeah, it's you know, almost better than the average of most New Zealand openers in cricket. So
yeah.
And hopefully
are you retiring?
Well. Yes, I've signalled that I've had
enough.
Run. If I can't make a difference in 17 years, it's time to pack up and go home. So give somebody else an opportunity.
Interesting. That's what Chris Finlayson said about Parliament. Why he stepped down. He said, if you can't do it in 15 years, get out.
Yeah.
Well, I would have said less than that, actually, 10, but something happened about a decade ago that gave me a reason to be around a bit longer. So that was sort of almost a second career in that respect.
I would like to say that your leadership at Waimakariri was bloody magnificent. So well done.
We were part of a really good team.
Yes, you and David.
Yeah, and a really, really engaged community. A lot of passionate people made a real difference.
Yeah. I would, so we've got one old retired professor. We had another one on transport. I don't know where he is yet.
Just heads of state as a monarch, they don't tend to be in the same country. And the new King of Spain is Felipe VI.
Thank you. Here's the next question.
I think I'll just mute a few people.
Yes. Muting time. Starting with me. Right, 5:30. Away we go. Welcome to Jim and Dawn to this gathering of people. We have quite a number of people on the Tuesday Club don't like Zooming, and so we don't get the numbers on Zoom that we get actually at the club. But many people click in afterwards, like Rosemary's recording, and we find people come and go, and then they question us. But one of the things that's really important, I think, with this Christchurch 2050 is that this is the start, and that there will be, I talked to Catherine this afternoon about the possibility of us picking up topics and following them through so that we can do in-depth look at different ideas that you will find useful. You might suggest that we look at it, etc. So that's welcome to this group of people. Over to you.
Okay, so I can't believe it's probably almost a year since I came and spoke to the club. And I can remember squeezing through all those people. So on one level, it's quite nice to be doing it on Zoom, but on the other, it's you certainly do pack them in when you hold them down there. And what a year for everybody, and for not just in the world, but for people in New Zealand. So in a way, Jim and I sat here today is for us a true embodiment about what it is we're really trying to achieve. And this isn't just some glossy, fairy big idea. Absolutely, we're in the position thinking about greater Christchurch. And our local authorities, the 3 local authorities plus ECAN, and our partners like the District Health Board and our government partners, it is absolutely pertinent and timely, even more so because of COVID, to be really thinking very long term about what's important to our place and what do we want this place to be and what does that look like in 30 years' time. If we don't do that thinking now and have ambition about that, we will never be able to succeed, and neither we will be able to tackle some of the inherent problems that are around in every place, but are particular, I think, for some of the things we're seeing here in New Zealand, and in particular around climate change. We're embedding this, and this particularly is our conversation with our iwi partners, and the real drive is about intergenerational well-being. New Zealand has, I think, a unique position in the world, particularly because of the well-being work that has been done at a governmental level, and how we draw that down into our places and make it really real. So when we talk about this, I think about my 17-year-old son, who will be 47 in 30 years' time, and what will that mean for him? So it's not just about what that means for our, let's be honest, white middle class, articulate people who will always get involved. It's genuinely thinking about every part of reach that we make into our place that is Greater Christchurch. We have a survey out at the moment, and I'll probably recap when we get to the end of this. And I know that, Gary, we're very grateful that you've been plugging that survey through the Tuesday Club, because we're keen to hear all sorts of voices, all shapes and sizes, because we think it's important. And we've started this by actually engaging the community first. Because to be able to think about that big picture, it means different things to different people. One size does not fit all, and it can't. We're a complex place of Greater Christchurch and a complex set of communities and partners. We need to be thinking about how do we build something that resonates with the majority of people, because you won't be able to please all of them. But at the forefront of our minds is absolutely about our children and our grandchildren. And when we get to 30 years hence, and hopefully we'll all still be here, can we look back in pride and say, actually that vision and that work really did guide us to a different place, and one that people feel very passionate about and can see the benefits of. So it's setting that scene, understanding though, this hasn't come out of nowhere. It's not built on verdant green land. It's built on a set of relationships that's always existed and has come from a set of work that's been done. So I think Jim's going to just touch on that and explain some of that history.
Thank you. And look, thank you very much for the opportunity to have a conversation tonight. Gary, as you well know, over the last 20 plus years in Greater Christchurch, we've been discussing and arguing about how Greater Christchurch should look and feel. And I actually reflect back to those early conversations in the early 2000s that you and the then mayors and chairs of Greater Christchurch led. And there were some fairly fiery and frank conversations that were held at those stages about how we deal with the future of Greater Christchurch and how do we get on, because at that time we only ever met in the Environment Court on planning matters, which is never the best forum to make friends and make progress. So the work that you and many of your colleagues at that time did in the early 2000s led to the 2007 Urban Development Strategy, and that was really fundamental from a Greater Christchurch point of view. One of the other things which came from that is when we actually got our act together, the government were prepared to listen, and while not loved by everybody, but the transport solutions that the government of the day invested in, whether that be the Western Bypass or the southern and northern arterials that are being completed at the moment, that was a sign of government being prepared to invest when they saw that we were actually had an agreed vision of what we were working towards. And I think the piece of work we're going to do for 2050 is actually really fundamental about that. It might be we're in a slightly different transport solutions period than we were then, and perhaps some may be thinking, lamenting even that we put in place a solution that is that was decided up to 20 years ago, and that's perhaps how the progress happens. But notwithstanding that, what got them involved was the ability to actually have seen us as joined up, have a unified approach and willing to partner with government and give and take in that arrangement. And I think that's been really important. I think, so we've had the 2007 UDS, while it was predominantly a spatial planning, urban growth and transport approach, it stood our Greater Christchurch in really good stead as we worked our way through the earthquakes and the recovery from the earthquakes, and it enabled development to occur far quicker than it otherwise would have. And people in red zones and others severely affected were able to be accommodated still within Greater Christchurch. And I think that was greatly appreciated by people where everything was changing around them. So that framework was actually a very valuable tool as we transitioned out of earthquake, well, the immediacy of the earthquake anyway, and through a thing called the Land Use Recovery Plan, which is a bit of jargon, which some of you will be familiar with. It again fast-tracked some of the development, which has enabled Greater Christchurch to have a good supply of land, and also has kept housing at comparatively more affordable levels than what has happened across the rest of New Zealand. And if I'm being honest, that's something that worries me a little bit at the moment. What we've seen post-COVID is the property market has got super hot and crazy, and that doesn't augur well for those who are disadvantaged at the moment or struggling to get into property or affordable rental. That is a big issue for us, and we need to be thinking about that. But it has stood us in good stead. But this strategy, and while I think, as Dawn said, we don't start from a clean slate. Importantly, we've actually got a pretty good Christchurch, Greater Christchurch already here. So how do we put the great in Greater Christchurch? And 2050 is really an opportunity to build on what is already really good about Christchurch. And there's lots that's good because, you know, like all of you, once we're here, we stay just about forever. So there's a compelling case for Christchurch. This piece of work has some really fundamental tenets to it. Dawn touched on iwi. That is fundamental, I think, to the success and aspirations of Greater Christchurch, working more closely in partnership. And it is really heartening that the Greater Christchurch Partnership has 3 representatives from iwi sitting all the time around our table, and as well as their staff engaging with us as we're planning and developing. So getting genuine engagement and connection and partnering on terms of opportunities is something that we're really working hard on. The other thing which Dawn touched on as well is the connection with the government. And as I mentioned earlier, where the government has been focused in recent years is around urban growth partnerships. So they have one established in Auckland, Hamilton, the Bay, Queenstown, looking at Wellington early next year. And at the moment, we don't have a strong enough voice in Wellington as a Greater Christchurch, we think. And as the second largest city in the country, being at the table and having their attention is important, notwithstanding the investment that government has made over the last decade in Greater Christchurch. There is still more to be done, as we know. So building a stronger relationship, a genuine relationship that government is prepared to understand that our needs might actually be slightly different from those other urban areas where they've been focused on housing affordability and transport or major transport solutions. Our needs might be quite different, and I think that's where the focus of this work around 4 well-beings, so looking at social, economic, cultural and environmental well-being, thinking about all of those well-beings, and then saying, how do we partner best with central government to get them engaged, and if they turn up with some coin, great. But how do we get them involved in the conversations and be willing to contribute as well, rather than sit from afar and focus on the Golden Triangle, which is Hamilton, Tauranga and North, which is a concern to us. So the wellbeing focus, environmentally thinking about climate change and what's important that we need to both protect and enhance in our environment within Greater Christchurch is something really important. Our economy, I think, needs a particular focus as well. And a bit of a shout out to Christchurch NZ. They are doing some really good work in thinking about what is needed in our economy. And if you were talking to somebody from outside of Christchurch and you tried to explain to them what is Christchurch known for in terms of what drives its economy, how would you describe Christchurch at the moment? And I'll leave that with you. And if you've got some observations later, it'd be great to hear them. But it used to be the productive base for the rural hinterland. Is it still that? I'm not sure what we would say is the standout features. And the work that Greater Christchurch NZ and Greater Christchurch are doing really is starting to think about, should we be promoting particular initiatives? And you've probably heard of the supernode idea. And I think that's got a lot of merit around food and fibre, health, aerospace and IT. I never knew how big our IT capacity in Greater Christchurch is until my daughter graduated and got a job here down Victoria Street. And I said, where are you? And she says, Verizon Connect. I said, never heard of them. How many are there? She says, there's 250 of us in the building down there. And I said, really? I said, what do you do? and she's, they're a GIS transport logistics business, which, and there are hundreds and hundreds of similar jobs across Greater Christchurch. And there's a significant powerhouse there that needs to add to the GDP and the average income and wages of Greater Christchurch. At the moment, they're not high enough relative to other international cities or even those in New Zealand. So I think there is work for us to do there, for us to be competitive globally and nationally and be known for something and proud of it. So there's plenty of opportunity, and we don't start from a clean slate, as I said. But we need to have some aspiration, and this process is about trying to resonate, understand what the community is looking for, and draw that together, and then say, okay, it's not just a glossy brochure. What are the actual plans and actions and partnering work that needs to be done? So it'll be an interesting piece of work. Looking forward to the feedback. I think, what did we say? We've got 1,400 responses so far to the survey, which is a good start, and really positively encouraged by that. So, Dawn, I suppose we've been talking at you a bit. I'm conscious of that, and you might want to round out some comments before we get to the conversation.
Yeah. So I just want to carry on the theme that Jim was saying. We are known for something across the world. And it's the earthquakes and how people coped with that. But fundamentally, we also need to put our heads and think, what does that future look like? And the reason I say that is fundamentally for New Zealand, we need our sub-region to be knocking it out the park, not being seen as being behind the curve. Now, that does not mean that we go with a begging bowl to government. That is not going to work. Fundamentally, this is also about what our investment case is about creating a bigger cake in New Zealand, not just trying to take from other regions, because fundamentally government aren't going to be interested in that, and quite rightly so. And I think the other thing is, as no longer the newcomer, but still look out of my window and go, oh my God, what an amazing place to be. And the fundamentals of the aspects of what we have here and the land and the people, we have the makings of something that could be extremely special, that benefits all parts of our communities, not just a certain part of it. So And we need to do that because we're in a competitive world. But there is a position for New Zealand as a country and the way we have behaved and reacted in the COVID epidemic that puts us in a very unique position. And business investment is looking at this country and thinking, I want to be in there because people know what they're doing. So we need to capitalise on that. So at the moment, the consultation is out. It closes on the 8th of November. As you say, very, very good response. And we've got some good media coverage from a whole raft of different places, plus using social media. And Catherine and Anna and the team and our partners doing some really, really good work. And we were particularly pleased with Arahea's thought piece as well, because that is really showing the breadth of the partnership. We're very hopeful that reach, and say it's 1,400, but it is all the usual people you would expect, if you see what I mean. The people who are articulate, of a certain age, and of a certain income bracket. And we need to reach into parts where people, so if you have your grandchildren and your children, please encourage them to participate, and their friends. We will be then running workshops. We're taking all of that information and distilling it to help us then run our workshops in November and December, our stakeholder workshops, so we can start to think about what those initiatives will be. And we will develop the plan between January and probably June of next year. And that's where we will be thinking, so how do we really make that work and alive? And how do we create excitement? Bedded on reality, because we need to know it's going to work, but we want it to work with real ambition. We don't want to just tweak at the edges. That will do nothing. And when we think about the fact that government policy is driving regional spatial plans, etc., we are putting ourselves in a good position to have a really excellent conversation with the Crown to talk about what we think that investment opportunity will be and how that drives outcomes for the long term, so that we don't find ourselves in a position where we're gridlocked by traffic, because we're not. We want to be able to keep that sort of environment and benefit from it in the future. So we're happy to take any questions. Yeah. And if we're really stuffed, we've got Catherine sat in the corner and she can answer them.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for that. Dawn, the date today is the what?
It's the 20th, I think, today. 20th
of October.
Yeah.
And you spoke at Smash Palace on the 22nd of October 2019.
Yeah.
So you're not quite a year. So,
a question?
Yeah.
I have two thoughts. Thanks for the overview. One is we were talking before about share an idea, and my question around that is that there was some quite clear stuff that came out of that, and I know it's a while ago now, but is there some way that some of that stuff can be brought into this conversation? That's my first question. The second one is about Vote Compass. And I'm also wondering if you've considered the way they used Vote Compass, that every now and again on the news, they'd say, oh, this is what people are saying so far. And I wondered if there was some way that you could gain some energy by just saying, well, these are kind of our preliminary voices so far, and they seem to be. So those are my two comments.
So the share an idea, I think there is an awful lot of research opinion already gained that we hold right across, and people are sick to death usually of being researched about what their vision for the future is. But so we do have a lot of information, and the share an idea at the time was a very successful process to identify what the central city should look like, and so there's a lot of learning still to be taken from that, which still applies. In terms of Vote Compass, it's something we should reflect on. Initially, we did talk about that and thought we'd like to hear a little bit from the community to get an idea, rather than put out the first views and then start to slant the conversation in a particular way, either supporting that or opposing it. So we've possibly got a sample size that is big enough now to help start to shape that, and if that energizes further engagement, I think that's something we should absolutely think about.
And what we're also doing is on the website, we are putting the flavours of where the populations and age profiles and ethnicity to try and drive some different conversations as well, so we can get some further reach. Because obviously we don't want just the voice of Christchurch residents, we want all three areas, and we want that spread. So we've been thinking, how can we iteratively get the best out of this as we go along? And it doesn't stop after the survey closes, because as you said, there's plenty of other data we can pull on. We won't ignore it.
You said we weren't. You said we weren't starting from a clean slate. I just wonder how people feel about the slate. Has it really delivered in the time from the earthquake in particular? Because I think there are certain elements there that may in fact be an impediment in terms of what we're hoping to do in terms of getting to 2015 with something that puts us at the front of things within New Zealand. So I think we need to talk about what we have at the moment. And my particular interest is probably more in the central city. I think there's a number of issues there that I won't sort of talk about at the moment, but I think there are problems there that we need to deal with before we start talking about the big and the great, if you like, in terms of what we may be able to do later on.
So Ray, I'd reflect, the reason we say we're not starting from a clean slate is to be respectful of the work that has been done, even if we say some of that is valid and some of that no longer is. If we were assuming actually we didn't have any information, then that I think would be disrespectful to the work that's happened in the past.
Oh, sure, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so that's really why we say that, and understanding the relationships that have existed. But the other side of that equation must be, as you say, it's 10 years on. So a whole set of things that have happened for quite clear reasons. But now we need to think, actually, how do we turn some of that success and supersize it? And how do we learn from the stuff that genuinely hasn't worked and make sure we don't keep repeating the same mistakes? But the key for me is what we shouldn't be doing is just going, well, 2050, it looks like that, and we'll figure out how to do it when we get to 2049. That's a waste of time.
Sure.
We need to be thinking about that and then working all the way back to now and going, right, so how do we build the stepping stones to get us to where we want to be? So that's what I would reflect on that.
One of the questions Steve's asked, is there any projection of population growth? Actually, on the 2050 website, Steve, there are projections, and the questions are being asked, how would that affect decisions on climate change, etc. So they're there, and they are encouraging people to actually comment on that. So keep that up. One of the things. Thanks. Go on, sorry.
Yep,
Jim.
Thanks. Projecting roughly mid-600,000 for Greater Christchurch by 2048. Still waiting for stats to do the magic on the last census, which is a little unfortunate. But that's what we're working towards at the moment, and it does have significant impacts on sustainability choices that we make. And it's an interesting conversation about what is the right.
So thank you for that. One of the things that I wonder about is, have you spoken to our IT sector on techniques of constant engagement? Because there's a lot of people out there that we haven't talked to that they have techniques that are actually quite good, and maybe that's something we could think about on the way through. Now, there's a question here. Bibi, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So it's not so much a question. Oh, I guess it is a little bit. But we were just talking before, people get tired of engagement because they don't see the tangible outcomes of that engagement. And it would be good to know that the plan or the vision or whatever it is actually is able to be enacted, that the partnership is committed to enacting it before it starts, regardless of what the outcomes are, and that there's money to go with the plan.
Really good comment, Ed. In terms of the partnership, can I just say, my observation is that probably the partnership in terms of being together is as good as it's ever been. So the people around the table at a political and an executive level, and I just acknowledge Dawn and the energy that she's bringing to the partnership table as well. It is actually a really engaged space at the moment where people want to do good. So that is a real plus. In terms of the plan, I absolutely agree with you that we need a plan that we're going to deliver on, and having a plan that looks like Disneyland out there, but there is no chance of ever progressing that. And that's the challenge about the, what's the stretch in it. And to be frank, we also need central government in this conversation, because when we actually start thinking about some of the investments required, it's no surprise all of Greater Christchurch is strapped for cash at the moment, and there's some things that we all know have contributed to that. So having a plan that is deliverable, or there is a commitment to make progress on delivering across the 30 years, because we don't have a 30-year budget quite yet. We've got a 10-year budget, but we need to, if we're saying that they are priorities, then how are we going to reflect those across Greater Christchurch? And the focus tends to come on local government, but actually for some of these areas, particularly if we're thinking about the economy, some of it is actually commitment from some other players who can really make a difference as well. And how do we keep them on board?
Yeah, and including the private sector. So Phoebe, I suppose I reflect on this, having done a lot of work in this field over many, many years. You have to chunk it into practical time zones, if you like, as you're working through. And as you do that, making sure you land those first pieces in the early years, being clear about, once you build those foundation stones, what then needs to come, and how what you're needing to do is create a snowball that actually then generates more interest, more opportunity, people become more engaged, actually the private sector comes more in because something is happening. And to try and do that and say, well, you've got to have the 30-year budget, nobody will commit to that, nobody. So we have to think about this, about tangible steps to create that next things that have really worked, and then move to the right. What's the next interconnection that will then drive the next set of behaviours, the next set of investments, the next set of benefit to outcomes? Because from where we're sitting, we need this to reach into our families, to our workforce as it stands, to our future workforce, and to benefit those people. Because if we can increase our wage rates, that also actually comes back to benefiting the economy. And you've got to get that circular impact. And it absolutely is doable, but you've got to be really clear about what those stepping stones are. And if it's woolly, it won't work. So I always cite, because I can't help it, I always cite Silicon Valley. You know, that was predicated on a failing industry where it went out the door, and the university, the private sector, and local authorities sat there and thought, if we don't do something about it, nobody will, and we'll be destroyed. And that vision, out of that came a vision and came something that was exceptional. We need to think, and I'm not saying it's Silicon Valley, but we need to think with that level of ambition and then build it from day one.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to start picking on people, because in the room I can normally read people's faces, but I can see Sam Johnson in the corner of my screen. Now in 2050 I'll be 99, and according to my calculation you'll be 59, Sam. So what's your view on if you're unmute yourself. Where is he?
We can't hear you, Sam. Are you still on mute?
Should be all right.
He's disappeared. Right. I'll pick on him in a minute. Eric, what's your view on from a long-term planning perspective? Eric Pawson. What advice would you be giving? When I think about the excellent seminar conference you organised on the Red Zone, where you brought all the right people together.
That was our governance seminar last year, yes.
Yes.
I don't have any advice. I have one or 2 points. Or it's interesting when we have discussions like this that share an idea always comes up. I mean, almost boringly so. But I think the reason for that is that people felt that they were in at ground level and their opinion counted for something. And it actually set a direction for the central city, even if it got taken over by the government's blueprint, that was sort of fresh and original. I think the problem with the sort of exercise we're going through at the moment, and I'm one of the 1,400 responses so far, is that the terms of engagement are set by other people. And it sort of goes on and on and on, and you feel like you're being consulted by somebody who's already decided not the outcome, but where the parameters are. I don't think share an idea was quite like that, which is why it always sort of comes up. That said, I think that the UDS and the exercise which we're going through at the moment is invaluable in one sense because it is anticipatory on a grand scale. And that's not something that we seem to do terribly often in this country. I mean, it does enable options to be thought about and gives us some space for consideration. But I'm conscious that that's not always everybody's view. And with a view to what we're talking about tonight, I was very interested in what one of the prominent central city developers said in the newspaper this morning, which was that he hoped the rest of the rebuild would be up to the private sector now, but the city council needed to enable progress, not act as a gatekeeper. And I'd like to know what Dawn thinks of that, because I've heard a number of developers talk about wishing that things could be enabled rather than gate kept, as it were. But that seems to me to get at the heart of the issue here. Are we in a situation which is enabling, or is somebody invisible actually setting the rules and almost encouraging people to think that they're being second-guessed?
So I'll take that head on, Eric.
Thank you.
So quite simply, I come from a tradition and a background that drives economic development and utilises the local authority to be the enabler language you are describing. In other words, open for business. But that needs to be set for this place and this time around sustainable business. It can't be business at any cost at any time and just because the private sector says it needs to be this way. But I absolutely am 150% committed to driving that activity through my organisation to such an extent is I have my diary actually in the next few weeks, quite a lot of private sector partners who are directly talking with myself and my teams. But I suppose the two things I'd reflect to you of saying you've got to do the cultural shift, but two hard-nosed evidence approach that says, yes, we are changing. One is actually pushing the Section 71 for the film industry, when in reality, that's late in the day. Could have been done quite a long time ago. But getting that over the line and driving the investment case and discussions with central government to get the stadium off the ground. Again, something that had been talked around for a very long time. So do I think we are perfect? Absolutely not. But am I trying to drive a culture that says we need to partner with people to get the results? And that needs to be people who are already here, but also people who are not here yet and are interested in terms of the investment market outside of Christchurch and outside of New Zealand. So that would be my perspective. Do you want to touch on the issue of we've sewn it all up and we're just asking people? Because we think we might have a different view than that.
Yeah, look, it's absolutely, and for everybody who's been here or connected to this conversation has been associated with a number of exercises that feel like exactly that. And share an idea did generate a great deal of energy at the time, and it created a buzz in the city and a hope. We deliberately decided not to go out with a proposal. So that was the first stage of this, is not to already have the, this is the plan, do you agree, which is code for this is the plan and we're going to carry on even if you don't agree. So we absolutely decided we don't want to put our view of what 2050 is until we'd actually got some good soundings from as many people in our community as we can about what they would like to see and aspire from. And the next stage is actually bringing together groups of stakeholders who can actually take those ideas and start shaping them and bringing their skills, knowledge and experience to the table and actually saying, well, okay, given where we are today and the diamond isn't polished, as we've already acknowledged, what do we then need to do to make progress? And look, it'll be a course of action that we're headed towards with some definite steps, and it'll be easier to define the steps in years 1 to 5 than it will be 45 to 50. Yeah. But we need to, but I don't think we're coming from a place of we actually have the idea. We all have our individual views, of course, but we've been very reluctant to put those forward until we've got a good sense of what a community thinks, and then work with community and stakeholders to actually shape that up.
Thank you very much. Sam, are you, Sam's now got onto Wi-Fi, there he is. Your views, you're on silent, Sam. No, turn the sound up. We might leave you to it.
Is your computer sound also switched off, Sam? If you go down to the bottom and put your microphone on down there.
I'll go while Sam's sorting himself out. Pat McIntosh, you are a GP in a poorer suburb of Christchurch, running a service for people of low incomes. How do we engage with that community? What would be your advice to this team?
Well, we have enough problems engaging in health matters without having the magic to engage on the wider issues as well. But most of the people we deal with are quite honestly too busy trying to deal with poverty and the problems of everyday life to actually have any spare energy for thinking about planning for the future. So I would love to know how to engage them, but I can't actually enlighten you on that one.
So that's a genuine problem, isn't it? Because Christchurch is a very low income, very low average income. And there's Pat saying, they can't even link properly to them on health issues without engaging, how do we give those people some sense of hope?
Got some reflections, guys, in terms of the work we're currently thinking about, because I think it would be helpful. Yeah, just come and say. And then
help is on the way.
Hi, everyone.
And then I might just answer that. If that's
okay. Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's such a great question. We've actually, as Dawn said, we've been analysing the data in terms of who's been responding in the different communities. And we've noticed, for example, there's a low response from, for example, Pacifica communities. And my husband's actually Samoan, and so I'm quite connected into the Pacific community at a personal level. But we've been reaching out to different leaders in the Pacifica community over the last week to say, how can we give Pacifica a voice in this process? And they reflected back to us that it is a genuine challenge with, for example, things that are online and emailed out, you know, that doesn't work necessarily. Yeah. So one example of what we're going to be doing is going on to Pacifica Radio in the next week or so, just to, they said that here's one solution, get on to Sam and Sefa radio on Plains FM. And that's probably going to be the most efficient way to get out to some of these communities. But no, we totally agree with that challenge. It is something that that we'd love to be able to solve. And we'll do everything we can to look into those communities and connect into those communities.
And maybe with the Pacific Island communities, the natural collecting place for them are their churches.
Yes, yeah. So that and that's what I would say. I used to run a charity outside of my job in the UK. And a lot of the work I've done before is absolutely about reaching into the poorest, the most poorest communities in the cities I've worked in. But building the relationships through their connections, not where we think we should be, but where they are, is absolutely the right way to approach it. Yeah. But also for us to think about those relationships that sit with the business community and how they can provide opportunities and reach into our schools, youth clubs, as you say, through churches, through the right places where people genuinely are, and start to build the bridges. Because that's how you create generational change. Yeah. I suppose I can say that just as you're married into a Pacifica community, I come from one of the most deprived communities in Huddersfield, and I now sit as the Chief Exec of Christchurch City Council. So I can speak really passionately about that journey and know that it's possible.
Patrick O'Connor's going to talk about refugee and migrant community.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the comment there, Catherine, about the Samoan community. I quite agree. And with your comment, Gary, about the churches, with the cohort of people that I work with, and I like reminding people that there are over 180 ethnicities living in Christchurch now. Yeah. And I think there are two ways of dealing with things. Most people in most communities have never heard of anything we're talking about. Yeah. And the way to get to these people is via the leaders. That's right. And via meetings with community boards and councillors, to have actual meetings with people with a translator there for simultaneous translation. And it is very time consuming and involves a lot of planning and work. And the other way, which not Christchurch City only, but New Zealand is far behind in, is translations of material. Now, very expensive to translate, and you have to be selective about what is the best investment in terms of translation. But these are the ways to reach people. Otherwise, these people, 182 ethnicities, you know, there are over 25,000 Chinese living in Christchurch now, 10,000 Samoans. You know, these communities will just be left behind. So we do need, and we'll talk about investment rather than cost, if we see it as an investment for our community. And I think also many of those kinds of things apply to other parts of our society who are not necessarily informed, but not because of language or cultural matters. So if we're to be, and we are a city where we've got the first multicultural strategy in New Zealand, only the second in Australasia, and we've got a multicultural advisory group reporting directly to city councillors. It's a really progressive, lovely thing that's happening. And the investment in people working in the City Council today. Only we had a meeting at the City Council that was very much supported by the Christchurch City Council.
So we are using the multicultural group.
Yes.
We think that's absolutely one of the key conversations, because you say reaching through leaders and connectors. There's I can remember myself speaking to the refugee group there's a refugee migrants group that sits across the whole of Christchurch. I went and spoke to them, and there are real opportunities for people to do those things because it's important.
So we have to protect our investment in this way.
Yeah. Well, that's all parts of our community, isn't it?
Yes.
And you will be surprised and amazed about well, I don't want to be rude, but the amazing ideas. These people have survived quite horrible things to get here.
Yeah.
So the energy and commitment to New Zealand is really real. And we want to harness that and utilise it.
We're doing very well, but we have to protect that investment that we make beautifully.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Now, Sam.
I got attempt 3, Gary. Can you hear me this time?
We can. Okay. It was just lovely. We weren't able to hear you. It's first time ever.
Oh, lucky you. It's your fault for inviting me to speak. I was quite happy on silent listening to these.
There you go.
You don't have to.
Dawn, I was interested in, you gave a rapturous speech when you first arrived in Christchurch to the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, yes.
And you said something that always stuck with me, which was, I'm going to tell you what you can expect of me and what I expect of you. And I thought that was a great line to use. And I don't know if you've used it since, but I thought it was great. So I'm interested in how's that going in terms of what we can expect of you? You spoke very candidly of driving a lot greater efficiency in the council. So have you been successful yet? Is my question. And my second part of in terms of the strategy that you've spoken about this evening, I hope that we can incorporate health and well-being issues into this. And
outcomes, yes. Yeah,
because I think the divide between the council and the DHB, I think there's a huge opportunity there, and I just think that's a great thing. And likewise, sort of a city really that spans between here and Timaru, a tight, narrow city that spans so we don't become Auckland. So I think it's very exciting and very encouraging. So well done and thank you.
Well, why don't you deal with the health board and then I'll tell you where we've got to with the city, because it's a 2050 conversation, but I'm happy to answer.
So health is part of the Greater Christchurch Partnership. So we have representation from the board there, which is encouraging, and right through they've been very helpful actually through our engagement processes, both this one and previous ones. So they're certainly engaged. Certainly health outcomes are a significant part of social well-being, and if we aren't picking up on those as part of a community in Greater Christchurch, mental health challenges, we seem to be overrepresented relative to other parts of the country, and that's a particularly concerning aspect for us all. And without wanting to blame it on anything, COVID certainly hasn't helped and probably triggered a number of the issues that people were previously experiencing post-earthquake as well. So mental health and broadly access to health services is a very important part of what we should be expecting a great community to look like, both now and in 2050. And if we're not where we need to be, then what do we need to do to improve our lot? And again, that's one of the partnerships with central government that we're talking about, having a commitment from them to accept the viewpoint that we're presenting, and then a willingness to actually partner to do things in perhaps different ways than what we currently are. So it's encouraging the connection we have with the District Health Board, but they've got their own challenges today to face. We all are very well aware of those, and but we need to then think, okay, what are we going to do, and what difference is the government going to make in this space? And look, let's be also honest about the government. They aren't flush with funds either. So we've all got a collective financial challenge in front of us. How do we get best value, and what are the priorities that we need to be investing in?
So to quickly answer your very broad question, Sam, I suppose the first thing I'd say, I inherited a budget deficit when I arrived here. I closed that by January. We went out with an annual plan in the first phase, which was getting people used to the fact that we could bring the rate down. And then COVID hit, that wiped out our financial resilience, including our dividend. And even in that circumstance, we were able to deliver an annual plan, a second annual plan that not only dealt with that financial position, but also reduced the rate after consultation. We went out with options at 3.5 and others, which came in at 3.8, which was still the lowest rate that Christchurch had seen since 2015. And we continue to drive that in terms of what we will do for the LTP. But fundamentally, efficiencies isn't just about what happens in your council. And I reflect the relationships with our partners, neighbouring authorities, partners within the city, and how we work also drives a far more productive set of behaviours and actions than if you try and do those things in isolation. And I do think that the way, and Gary can comment on this, we've utilised the External Advisory Board, and I have made sure that every cupboard and every door has been opened and not allowed to be slammed in the face. So a very open approach to how we can drive an improving council.
Can I just add to that? And I've, as a neighbour in council, I've observed what's going on. So, and we're often critical of our neighbours, but I can genuinely see stones being turned over in every direction in Christchurch. So I would endorse that Dawn is looking in all cupboards for anything that can be saved. At the point, and we in Waimakariri, and I know in Selwyn, are facing similar challenges, but perhaps not quite the overall quantums, but there's a relative equivalent challenge that we're facing. And we're starting to get to the point, and nobody likes addressing levels of service or seeing levels of service fall. And the commentary that I'm starting to give to our council, which will come with our community, this round we think we will go as far without significantly affecting levels of service in a community. But if we want to go too much deeper and sustain low rate increases and low investment, then levels of service conversations are going to be needed with our community, and they're never popular. And our elected members are never really wanting to have those conversations. But there isn't, there's a perception that we all wear cardies and that we're fat. There's areas that we can be a bit fitter in. I grant you that. But the challenges we're facing, I would say I know our employees are working damn hard to try and deliver what their community's expecting from them, and there isn't too much left in the cupboard. So that will start to be challenging conversations for communities, and we need to then think about what are the real priorities that we're prepared to invest in.
So, and I'd reflect that and completely agree with Jim. Now it's not a case of, well, we'll keep building all these things. It genuinely has to be a conversation about what's important and what are the choices we collectively have to make, because that might be the 10-year plan, but set that in the context of what we're doing on 2050 and how we deal with the challenges that we now face and we can see in the long term. The decisions we make now will absolutely impact on the ability for us to be successful in 20 years and 30 years' time. And we know that because of the stuff we've dealt with for the last 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's good to have a platform to say that as well, because I think we're seeing changes and it's excellent. So.
Yeah, thank you. Now, one of the points that I had before we started that I thump quite regularly on the Tuesday Club notes, the role of Greater Christchurch in the South Island.
Yes.
What have you got space for that consideration?
Most definitely is the reply that I would say, Gary. So a real tangible product of that, we have agreed as the 4 councils to write a single briefing to government.
Great.
And that's what we are currently doing. It's not 4, it's a GCP, the councils of GCP coming together to write that briefing.
I think there are several layers to that, Gary, and you'll be well familiar with them with your involvement in local government. At a South Island level, we're really conscious that we are still behind the 8 ball, and Sam Broughton, Mayor of Selwyn, is the chair of Zone 5 of LGNZ, and he's working with his colleagues further south. Zone 5 is the top half of South Island, Zone 6 the bottom half, to say what is the voice of the South Island that needs to be heard nationally, and as Dawn said, what's the role of Christchurch in the South Island and in the New Zealand context as well. We need to be far bolshier about our role in the place and the difference we can make, and the difference that, or the risk that New Zealand and the South Island faces if we don't step up. And we need to have confidence that a little bit of the challenge, and you'll be well familiar with this as well, is we need to have the confidence of other people in the South Island that Christchurch and Greater Christchurch is genuinely concerned about their interests as well as just Christchurch, because there is a sense that, well, this is just Christchurch looking after itself. It's actually, we have a role broader than that, and when we make up more than half the population of the South Island, then we actually have a leadership role for the South Island that we need to play more strongly than I think we currently are. So your point is well made.
And we see that as part of our role, basically.
I do feel it's, you know, I witnessed in local government that Golden Triangle organised themselves 15 to 20 years ago. And that's our challenge as an island. Otherwise, we will fall behind. And it's silly little things, but, you know, on election night, there was practically nobody from the South Island there as a spokesperson in any area. And I do applaud your comment, Jim, about Sam being the chair of Zone 5. So it's not the Mayor of Christchurch, it's the Mayor of Greater Christchurch. So it's not, you know, so you're all doing it together, and I really, really applaud that big time. But we actually have to, I used to always feel when I went to the North Island, I was representing the South Island. And I think that's really important that we actually think as an island. And if we do that, then we will be much stronger, and our economies will grow, will be attractive for people to live here, etc., etc. But anyway, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. We will follow this up with different subsets. We'd like you to define what you think we should be doing. And we will, we're very, very happy to be a positive player in your consultation.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the. Thank you very much.
So we got up to 27 people at one stage.
That's not too bad.
No.
Awesome.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye bye.